The Tuesday morning call that destroyed my life came at exactly 9:47 a.m. I remember because I was staring at my computer screen, reconciling expense reports for the Henderson account, when my desk phone rang with that shrill tone that always made me wince. David Palmer speaking. Mr. Palmer, this is Detective Lisa Warren with Phoenix PD Missing Persons. We're reopening a 2019 case due to new evidence, and I need to ask you some questions about your wife, Rebecca Stone Palmer. The words hit me like ice water. I set down my coffee cup, my hand suddenly unsteady. I'm sorry, what? There must be some mistake. My wife has never been involved with police. Sir, I understand this is unexpected. Could we meet today? There are some developments in a missing persons case that directly involve your wife. Missing person? Detective, I think you have the wrong Rebecca Palmer. My wife works at Pickett and Associates law firm. She's never mentioned anything about a missing person. There was a pause, and I heard papers rustling. Mr. Palmer, when was the last time your wife used the phone number 602-555-7284? The number meant nothing to me. I have no idea. She's had the same number for years. According to our records, that number was registered to Rebecca Stone Palmer until September 2019. She disconnected it and got a new number shortly after. Do you remember that happening? September 2019. Something nagged at the back of my mind. She mentioned her phone was acting up around then. Said she needed an upgrade. Mr. Palmer, I'm going to be direct with you because this is serious. We have evidence linking your wife to Marcus Taylor, who disappeared on September 15, 2019. She was the last person to see him alive. My office suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in. I don't know anyone named Marcus Taylor. Sir, our phone records show over 600 calls between your wife and Mr. Taylor in 2019. We've also connected her to a storage unit that contains evidence related to his disappearance. 600 calls. The number echoed in my head as I tried to process what the detective was saying. Rebecca, my quiet, reserved wife who barely talked to anyone outside of work, had made 600 calls to a man I'd never heard of. Mr. Palmer, are you still there? Yes, This doesn't make sense. There has to be an explanation. That's what we're hoping to find. Can you come in today? I'd like to show you what we've discovered. I looked at my desk calendar, filled with client meetings and deadlines that suddenly seemed meaningless. What time? How about 2 o'clock? Phoenix PD headquarters, 620 West Washington Street. Ask for Detective Warren at the front desk. After hanging up, I sat staring at my computer screen, the numbers and figures blurring together. 600 calls to someone named Marcus Taylor. A storage unit. A missing person. I thought about calling Rebecca, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the detective's tone, or the way she'd said, evidence linking your wife. Instead, I told my assistant I was taking a long lunch and would be out for the rest of the afternoon. The drive to the police station passed in a haze. I kept trying to remember September 2019, what Rebecca had been doing, how she'd acted. It was during one of my busy seasons. Tax extensions were due, and I'd been working late most nights. Rebecca had seemed… what? Stressed? She'd mentioned a difficult case at work, some complex litigation that was keeping her busy. The Phoenix Police Headquarters building was a stark concrete structure that looked exactly like what you'd expect from a government building built in the 1970s. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I approached the front desk. I'm here to see Detective Warren, David Palmer. The desk officer made a quick call, then directed me to the third floor. Detective Warren met me at the elevator. A woman in her early 40s with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a navy blazer over dark slacks, and her handshake was firm. "Mr. Palmer, thank you for coming in. I know this is difficult." She led me down a hallway lined with identical doors to a small conference room. The table was covered with file folders, photographs, and what looked like phone records printed on green-striped computer paper. "Please sit down. Can I get you some water, coffee?" "Water would be good." She left briefly and returned with a plastic bottle, then settled across from me. "Mr. Palmer, before we begin, I want you to know that you're not under investigation. You're here as a potential witness, and anything you tell me could be helpful in finding out what happened to Marcus Taylor." "Okay." My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Detective Warren opened the first folder and pulled out a photograph of a man with dark hair and a goatee, smiling at the camera. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a polo shirt. "This is Marcus Taylor. He was 38 when he disappeared, going through a divorce, liquidating assets. On September 15, 2019, he sent a text message to a friend saying he was meeting Becca at the storage unit. That was the last anyone heard from him." I stared at the photo. The man was completely unfamiliar. "I've never seen him before." "I didn't expect you would have." She pulled out a thick stack of papers. "These are phone records for the number that was registered to your wife until September 2019. From January through September of that year, she had extensive contact with Marcus Taylor." She spread several pages across the table, and I could see highlighted entries, line after line of calls and text messages. The dates, times, and duration of each call were meticulously recorded. 637 calls, Detective Warren said. Over 2,000 text messages. The pattern shows they were in contact almost daily. I picked up one of the pages, scanning the entries. Calls lasting 10 minutes, 20 minutes, some over an hour. Text messages sent at all hours, early morning, late night, during what should have been work hours. "Mr. Palmer, did your wife mention taking any vacation days in 2019? Any unexplained absences or changes in her routine?" I thought back. "She mentioned overtime a few times, weekend work, but no vacations that I remember." "What about September 15th through 20th? That entire week?" The dates meant nothing to me. September 2019 was a blur of tax work and client meetings. I honestly don't remember. I was probably working late every night. Detective Warren made a note. "According to our investigation, Marcus Taylor liquidated approximately $180,000 in assets in the weeks before he disappeared. Retirement accounts, stocks, proceeds from selling personal property as part of his divorce settlement. All converted to cash." "And you think my wife was involved?" "Mr. Palmer, 2 days after Marcus disappeared, your wife disconnected her phone number and got a new one. When officers initially questioned her in 2019 about Marcus, because his phone record showed contact with her number, she denied knowing anyone by that name. The room felt like it was spinning. She lied to the police? According to the initial report, yes. But here's where it gets more complicated. Detective Warren opened another folder. 3 weeks ago, we received an anonymous tip from a former employee of Secure Store Phoenix. This person told us that a woman named Rebecca Stone had been making monthly payments on a storage unit since October 2019. My maiden name. Rebecca had kept her maiden name professionally, but used Palmer socially. Storage unit? Unit 47B. We obtained a warrant yesterday and opened it. She pulled out more photos, these showing the interior of a storage unit. Men's clothing on hangers, boxes of personal items, electronics. This was all inside Mr. Palmer. Personal belongings that Marcus's family confirms belonged to him, including his wallet, with all identification and credit cards intact. I stared at the photos. Work clothes, casual shirts, a laptop bag, stacks of papers and documents. My wife has been paying for this? Monthly automatic payments from her checking account. 5 years, Mr. Palmer. She's been maintaining this storage unit for 5 years. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Rebecca lied about knowing Marcus Taylor, she'd been secretly maintaining a storage unit filled with his belongings. For 5 years. While living with me, sleeping beside me every night, she'd been hiding this enormous secret. There's more. Detective Warren pulled out a box and removed several items carefully bagged in clear plastic. Love letters. Written correspondence between your wife and Marcus Taylor spanning 2018 and 2019. She handed me one of the bagged letters, and I could see Rebecca's handwriting through the plastic. My wife's neat, careful script that I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards. But these words were nothing I'd ever seen from her. My dearest Marcus, I can't stand another day of pretending. David suspects nothing, but I feel like I'm dying inside every time I have to act like the devoted wife. 2 more months, and we can finally be together properly. My hands shook as I set the letter down. When was this written? July 2019. Mr. Palmer, from what we can piece together, your wife and Marcus Taylor were planning to leave Phoenix together. There's evidence of hotel stays, joint financial planning, even discussions about relocating to another state. I felt nauseous. You think she killed him? We don't know what happened yet. What we do know is that Marcus Taylor disappeared after telling a friend he was meeting your wife. His belongings ended up in a storage unit that she's been paying for ever since, and she lied to police about knowing him. Detective Warren leaned forward. Mr. Palmer, I need to ask you some specific questions about your wife's behavior in September 2019. Anything unusual? Any changes in routine? Any periods where she was unaccounted for? I tried to focus, to push through the shock and think clearly. She was stressed. She said there was a difficult case at work, some kind of complex litigation. She was working late, coming home tired. Did she take any time off work? She called in sick for a few days, said she had the flu. The memory came back suddenly. It was after Labor Day. She was out Monday through Friday, stayed in bed most of the time. September 15th through 20th, Detective Warren confirmed, making another note. That matches the timeline exactly. We sat in silence for a moment. The detective seemed to be weighing how much more to tell me, while I tried to absorb the fact that my marriage, my entire life, was apparently built on lies. What happens now? I finally asked. We're going to continue investigating. We'll be requesting another interview with your wife, this time with full disclosure of what we've found. Given the evidence, she'll probably want to hire an attorney. An attorney. The word hit me like another punch to the stomach. My wife was going to need criminal defense representation. Mr. Palmer, I have to ask, did you notice any unusual financial activity? Any unexplained expenses or changes in your wife's spending? I shook my head. We keep separate checking accounts. I handle most of the household bills. She manages her own money. I never paid much attention to her account. What about September 2019? Any large purchases, travel expenses, anything out of the ordinary? I don't think so. But honestly, Detective Warren, I wasn't paying attention. I was completely focused on work. She nodded. That's understandable. One more question. Has your wife mentioned Marcus Taylor since 2019? Any references to someone by that name? Or to events from that time period? No, nothing. Detective, until this morning, I'd never heard that name in my life. Detective Warren began gathering up the files and photos. Mr. Palmer, this is going to be difficult for you. What we've shown you today is just the beginning of the investigation. There will likely be more evidence, more questions. I want you to know that victim services can connect you with counseling resources if you need them. Victim services. I was apparently a victim too, just not the kind I'd ever imagined becoming. When will you interview Rebecca again? We're setting that up now, probably within the next few days. Given the serious nature of the evidence, she'll likely be advised to exercise her right to remain silent. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. Should I tell her about this meeting? That's up to you, Mr. Palmer. You're not under any obligation to keep this confidential. But I will say that in cases like this, sometimes it's better to let the investigation proceed without interference. I left the police station feeling like I was walking through a dream. The Phoenix heat hit me as I stepped outside, but I felt cold. During the drive home, I called my office and told my assistant I was taking sick leave for the rest of the week. Rebecca's car was already in the driveway when I got home, which was unusual. She typically worked until at least 5:30. I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at our house, a modest ranch-style place in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing exciting ever happened. The house where my wife had been living a double life for years. I found Rebecca in the kitchen, standing at the counter with her back to me. She was still wearing her work clothes, a navy dress with matching cardigan, very professional and conservative. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in the low bun she always wore to the office. "You're home early," I said. She turned, and I searched her face for any sign of guilt or anxiety. But she looked the same as always, calm, composed, slightly tired from work. "Slow day. I finished my filing early," she smiled. "How was your day?" For a moment, I almost told her about Detective Warren, about the storage unit and the phone records. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way she'd lied to the police in 2019, or maybe I just wanted to see if she would confess on her own. Fine, nothing special. Rebecca turned back to the counter, where she was sorting through mail. "Oh, David, the strangest thing happened today. I got a call from someone claiming to be with the police, asking about some man I'd supposedly met. I told them they had the wrong person." My blood ran cold. She was lying again, right to my face, just like she'd lied to the police 5 years ago. What did they want to know? Some nonsense about a missing person case. They had me confused with someone else. She shrugged dismissively. "You know how these things go. Probably calling everyone with a similar name." I watched her carefully. There was no sign of nervousness, no telltale signs of deception. Rebecca had always been good at staying calm under pressure, but this was different. This was practiced. Did they mention a name, the missing person? Something with an M. Michael, maybe. I really wasn't paying attention. Marcus. She knew exactly who they were asking about, but she was pretending not to even remember his name correctly. "Well, I'm sure they'll figure it out," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mm-hmm. Rebecca was already moving on, opening bills and sorting them into piles. "Oh, we got the credit card statement. Looks like the automatic payment went through fine. Storage unit payments. I realized she was probably talking about the automatic payment for the storage unit where she'd been hiding Marcus Taylor's belongings for 5 years. That night, I lay in bed next to my wife and tried to process everything I'd learned. Rebecca slept peacefully beside me, breathing slowly and deeply like she always did. She'd taken her shower, brushed her teeth, put on her usual cotton nightgown, and settled into her side of the bed exactly like she had thousands of times before. But everything was different now. I kept thinking about the love letters Detective Warren had shown me. Rebecca's handwriting, Rebecca's words, expressing feelings I'd never seen from her. In our 14 years of marriage, she'd been affectionate but never passionate, caring but never romantic. I'd always assumed that was just her personality, reserved, practical, not given to grand gestures or emotional displays. Now I knew she was capable of intense feelings. She just hadn't felt them for me. The next morning, Rebecca left for work at her usual time. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway, then immediately called Detective Warren. "Detective, this is David Palmer. I need to tell you something. My wife lied to me yesterday about your call." "What did she say?" "She told me someone from the police called asking about a missing person, but she claimed not to know what it was about. Said they had her confused with someone else and that she didn't even remember the name correctly. She called him Michael, but she knew we were calling about Marcus Taylor. She had to know. She was too specific about not remembering details." Detective Warren was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Palmer, this confirms what we suspected. Your wife is going to continue denying everything. We're going to need you to be very careful about what you say to her." "Am I in danger?" "I don't think so, but I do think your wife is involved in something very serious, and cornered people sometimes do unpredictable things." After hanging up, I called in sick to work again. I couldn't concentrate on tax returns and financial statements when my entire life was falling apart. Instead, I drove to the Phoenix Public Library and used one of their computers to research everything I could find about Marcus Taylor. The missing person case had made local news in 2019, but only briefly. Marcus Taylor, 38, construction project manager, recently divorced, last seen September 15th. The news coverage was minimal, a small story buried in the back pages of the local section. But I found his obituary from 2020. His family had held a memorial service, officially declaring him dead after he'd been missing for a year. He left behind parents, 2 siblings, and an ex-wife. The obituary described him as kind, generous, and devoted to his family. I stared at his photo on the library computer screen. This was the man my wife had loved, the man she'd planned to run away with, the man who had disappeared after going to meet her. That afternoon, I hired a private investigator. Kevin Murphy was a former Phoenix police detective who now ran a small investigation firm. His office was in a strip mall between a tax preparation service and a dry cleaner. Not glamorous, but he came highly recommended from an attorney friend. "I need you to look into my wife's activities from 2018 and 2019, I told him, after explaining the situation. Phone records, financial transactions, travel, anything that might help explain her connection to Marcus Taylor." Murphy was a lean man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. He listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "The police investigation will cover most of this," he said when I finished. "What exactly are you hoping to find that they won't?" "I need to know how long this was going on, whether there were other men, other lies. I need to understand what kind of person I was married to." Murphy nodded. "I can do a comprehensive background check, financial analysis, and timeline reconstruction. But Mr. Palmer, be prepared for what we might find. Once you start digging into someone's secrets, there's no going back. I understand. It'll take about a week to pull everything together. But I can start with the basics today. Employment records, credit reports, travel history. I wrote him a check for his retainer fee, feeling like I was paying to have my marriage officially dissected. But I had to know the truth. 3 days later, Detective Warren called again. Mr. Palmer, we've scheduled a formal interview with your wife for tomorrow afternoon. She's hired an attorney, Patricia Wells from Pickett and Associates. Pickett and Associates, Rebecca's own law firm. She was using her employer's legal services to defend against potential criminal charges. What should I expect? Given the evidence we have, I suspect her attorney will advise her to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights. But we're hoping that showing her what we know might encourage cooperation. Will she be arrested? Not immediately. We're still building the case. But Mr. Palmer, I want you to know that we've found additional evidence. My stomach clenched. What kind of evidence? Cell phone tower data from 2019. We've been able to track both your wife's and Marcus Taylor's movements on September 15th. They were both in the same area that afternoon, a remote section of desert about 30 miles outside Phoenix. Desert. In Arizona, when someone went missing in the desert, it usually meant only one thing. You think that's where? We're organizing a search. It'll take some time. It's a large area, and desert searches are complicated, but it's our best lead for finding Marcus Taylor. After Detective Warren hung up, I sat in my home office, the spare bedroom where I did tax work during busy season, and tried to absorb the implications. Rebecca hadn't just hidden an affair from me. She'd apparently been involved in Marcus Taylor's disappearance and possibly his death. I looked around the room at the neat files and organized desk supplies. Rebecca had helped me set up this office when we'd bought the house 8 years ago. She'd picked out the desk chair, suggested the filing system, even chosen the paint color. Now I wondered if she'd been planning to abandon all of this when she ran away with Marcus. That evening, I decided to confront her. Rebecca was in the living room, watching the local news and working on a crossword puzzle, her usual weeknight routine. She looked up when I walked in, giving me a small smile. How are you feeling? You've been under the weather this week. Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Something flickered in her eyes. Wariness, maybe, or calculation. Of course. Did you know a man named Marcus Taylor? For just a moment, her composure slipped. Her hand holding the pen tightened, and she looked away from me toward the television. I don't think so. Why? The police contacted me. They said you were the last person to see him before he disappeared in 2019. Rebecca set down her crossword puzzle and faced me directly. David, I told you someone called me with questions about a missing person. I didn't know who they were talking about. They have phone records, Rebecca. 600 calls between you and Marcus Taylor. The room went completely silent, except for the murmur of the television. Rebecca stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, calculating how much I knew and how much she could still deny. I don't know what you're talking about. They found a storage unit, registered under your maiden name, filled with his belongings. Her face went pale. That's impossible. You've been paying for it monthly since October 2019. There are love letters, Rebecca. Your handwriting. Your words about leaving me to be with him. Rebecca stood up slowly, her hands shaking slightly. I think I need to call my attorney. Your attorney? Rebecca, what the hell is going on? Who are you? She walked toward the hallway, but I stepped in front of her. Don't walk away from me. I deserve an explanation. I can't talk about this. Can't or won't. David, please, just leave this alone. Leave it alone? My wife was having an affair with a man who's now missing, and you want me to leave it alone? Rebecca's composure finally cracked completely. Tears started streaming down her face, and her voice became a whisper. I loved him. God help me. I loved him so much. The admission hit me like a physical blow. After 5 years of lies, 5 years of pretending that phone call from the police was a mistake, she was finally telling the truth. What happened to him, Rebecca? I don't know. She was sobbing now. He was supposed to meet me that night. We were going to leave together, start over somewhere new. But he never came. So you kept his belongings? For 5 years? I hoped he might come back. I thought maybe he'd gotten scared and run away, but that someday he'd contact me. I stared at my wife, this woman I'd shared a bed with for 14 years, and realized I didn't know her at all. You've been lying to me for our entire marriage. No, David, that's not true. I love you too. I never wanted to hurt you. But you loved him more. She couldn't answer that, which was answer enough. Rebecca, where is Marcus Taylor? I swear to you I don't know. I've been wondering for 5 years what happened to him. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't trust anything she said anymore. Pack a bag. I want you out of the house tonight. David, please. Out. Tonight. We'll figure out the rest later. Rebecca went upstairs without another word. I heard her moving around in our bedroom, opening and closing drawers. 20 minutes later, she came downstairs with a small suitcase. I'll be staying at my sister's. Detective Warren is interviewing you tomorrow, with your attorney. She nodded. I know. Are you going to tell them the truth this time? Rebecca paused at the front door. I don't know what the truth is anymore, David. I thought Marcus loved me enough to leave everything behind. But maybe I was wrong about that too. After she left, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in the dark living room, trying to understand how I'd missed all the signs. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there had been signs. I just hadn't recognized them for what they were. Rebecca's stress in September 2019. Her new phone number. The way she'd started handling more of the household paperwork around that time, taking control of bills and accounts I used to manage. Even her increased interest in our financial situation. She'd started asking detailed questions about my retirement accounts and life insurance policies. Had she been planning to disappear with Marcus and take my money too? The next afternoon, Kevin Murphy called with his preliminary findings. Your wife's been living a very compartmentalized life, he said. I found hotel receipts, restaurant charges, gas station purchases in locations that don't match her work schedule or the account of her movements that you gave me. How much? From what I can piece together, the affair started in early 2018, maybe even late 2017. She was meeting Marcus Taylor regularly. Hotels, dinners, weekend trips, when she told you she was working overtime or visiting her sister. 2 years, maybe longer. Our entire marriage had been a sham. There's more, Mr. Palmer. In September 2019, your wife took 5 consecutive vacation days from work. But according to your account, she told you she was sick. She was planning to leave. That's what it looks like. I also found evidence of financial planning. She'd researched banking regulations for international transfers, looked into countries without extradition treaties with the U.S., international transfers, extradition treaties. Rebecca hadn't just been planning to leave Phoenix with Marcus. She'd been planning to leave the country. How much money was involved? Hard to say, but based on Marcus Taylor's financial records, he'd liquidated almost everything he owned, about $180,000 in cash. And Rebecca? No unusual activity in her accounts. But Mr. Palmer, I think she was planning to disappear with Marcus Taylor's money, not her own. That evening, Detective Warren called to update me on the interview. Your wife invoked her Fifth Amendment rights on the advice of counsel. She didn't answer any questions about Marcus Taylor, the storage unit, or her activities in September 2019. So we still don't know what happened. Not yet. But Mr. Palmer, we've made significant progress on the search. Ground-penetrating radar has identified several anomalies in the desert area where the cell phone data placed both of them. We'll be excavating starting Monday. You think you'll find him? I think we'll find answers. Over the weekend, I moved Rebecca's remaining belongings out of our house and into storage. I couldn't stand seeing her clothes in our closet, her books on our shelves, the little reminders of a woman who had apparently never existed. Going through her things was like conducting an archaeology dig of deception. I found a second cell phone hidden in her jewelry box, an old flip phone that I'd never seen before. When I turned it on, the contact list contained only one entry, M. Marcus. I also found travel brochures for Costa Rica, Mexico, and several Caribbean islands. They were hidden inside an old photo album between pictures of our early dating years. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. Monday morning, Detective Warren called again. We found him. 3 words that changed everything. Marcus Taylor's remains were discovered this morning in a shallow grave about 35 miles northeast of Phoenix. The medical examiner is conducting an autopsy, but initial examination suggests foul play. Murder? We can't say definitively until we have the full autopsy results. But Mr. Palmer, this changes everything. We'll be filing charges against your wife. What charges? That depends on what the medical examiner finds. But at minimum, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and filing false police reports. And if the autopsy shows homicide? Then we'll be looking at murder charges. I hung up and sat in my empty house, trying to process the fact that my wife of 14 years was likely going to be charged with murder. That afternoon, Rebecca called me from her sister's house. David, I heard about what they found. I need you to know that I didn't kill Marcus. Then what happened, Rebecca? He's dead in the desert, and you've been hiding his belongings for 5 years. I don't know what happened to him. I swear on my mother's grave I don't know. Rebecca, they're going to arrest you. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. David, I'm scared. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old protective instinct I'd always had for her. Then I remembered the love letters, the secret phone, the travel brochures for countries without extradition treaties. You should be scared. You've been lying about this for 5 years. I was protecting him. Protecting who? Marcus? He's dead, Rebecca. I thought maybe he'd had to disappear because of his divorce or financial problems or I don't know. I thought if I kept his things safe, someday he'd come back for them. And you never thought to mention this to the police? Or to me? Rebecca was crying again. I couldn't. If Marcus was hiding, telling the police would have put him in danger. And telling you... God, David, How do you tell your husband that you were planning to leave him for another man? By telling the truth. I'm telling you the truth now. 5 years too late. 2 days later, Rebecca was arrested at her sister's house. The charges included second-degree murder, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and filing false police reports. The local news covered the arrest, and I found myself watching my wife being led away in handcuffs on the evening news. The medical examiner had found evidence of blunt force trauma to Marcus Taylor's skull. He'd been killed by repeated blows to the head, then buried in a shallow grave. The autopsy also revealed defensive wounds on his hands and arms, suggesting he'd fought for his life. Rebecca posted bail 3 days later, using money from her retirement account. Her attorney scheduled a press conference where Patricia Wells stood at a podium outside the courthouse and proclaimed her client's innocence. Mrs. Stone Palmer is the victim of a rush to judgment by law enforcement, Wells declared. The evidence will show that she had no involvement in Marcus Taylor's death. But the evidence was overwhelming. In addition to the phone records and storage unit, forensic analysis of Rebecca's car had found soil samples that matched the burial site. Her internet search history from September 2019 included queries about decomposition rates in desert climates and the maximum depth required for effective body disposal. The prosecution also revealed that Rebecca had purchased zip ties, bleach, and a shovel from different stores in the days before Marcus disappeared. Security camera footage showed her making these purchases alone, paying with cash. When I learned about the zip ties and bleach, I finally understood that my wife was not the victim of circumstances. She was a calculated killer who had planned Marcus Taylor's murder in advance. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Marcus's family. His parents, Sarah and Robert Taylor, were devastated by the loss of their son and the brutal details of his death. His sister, Jennifer, gave victim impact statements that left half the courtroom in tears. Rebecca sat at the defense table, wearing conservative suits and maintaining the same calm composure I'd known for 14 years. She looked like the woman I'd married, but I knew now that person had never really existed. The prosecution's case was methodical and comprehensive. They presented the phone record showing the extensive relationship between Rebecca and Marcus. They showed the love letters, the hotel receipts, the financial planning for their planned escape. They traced Rebecca's purchases of the zip ties and shovel, her internet searches about body disposal, and the soil evidence from her car. Most damning was the evidence about the storage unit. Rebecca had visited the unit monthly for 5 years, not just to pay the bill but to access the contents. Security cameras showed her spending significant time inside the unit, suggesting she was actively managing Marcus's belongings rather than simply preserving them. The defense tried to paint Rebecca as a woman trapped in an abusive relationship who had killed Marcus in self-defense during a confrontation gone wrong. But there was no evidence of abuse in my marriage to Rebecca, and the zip ties and bleach suggested premeditation rather than a spur-of-the-moment killing. Rebecca chose not to testify in her own defense, which I thought was probably wise. Her attorney had prepared a statement claiming that Marcus had become violent when Rebecca tried to end their relationship, and that she'd killed him to protect herself. But the evidence didn't support that narrative. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Rebecca was convicted of second-degree murder, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and filing false police reports. At sentencing, the judge noted the particularly heinous nature of the crime, not just the murder itself, but the 5 years of continued deception and the impact on Marcus's family, who had spent years wondering what happened to their loved one. Mrs. Stone Palmer, the judge said, your actions have caused immeasurable pain to multiple families. You took a life, then spent 5 years actively concealing your crime while the victim's family suffered without answers. This court sentences you to 25 years to life in the Arizona Department of Corrections. Rebecca showed no emotion as the sentence was read. She was handcuffed and led away to begin serving her term at the Perryville Women's Correctional Center. The divorce proceedings were complicated by the criminal case. As the spouse of a convicted felon, I was entitled to protection under Arizona's victim rights statutes. Rebecca's conviction for murder eliminated any claim she might have had to my assets, and the court ordered restitution to Marcus's family that would consume most of Rebecca's remaining financial resources. I kept our house but sold it 6 months later. Living in the place where Rebecca had planned Marcus's murder while lying to me every day had become unbearable. I used the proceeds to relocate to Colorado, where I took a job with a small accounting firm in Denver. The trauma of discovery and the trial had been devastating, but I found help through victim services counseling and a support group for families of crime victims. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the trauma counselor assigned to my case, became first a professional lifeline and later a close friend. She understood the unique challenges of learning that someone you loved was capable of murder. 2 years after Rebecca's conviction, I received a letter from Marcus's sister Jennifer. She had kept in touch periodically, sending updates about their family and checking on my recovery. But this letter was different. David, she wrote, I wanted you to know that we never blamed you for what happened. You were as much a victim of Rebecca's deception as Marcus was. In a strange way, knowing that she was lying to you too makes us feel like Marcus wasn't uniquely foolish for trusting her. Thank you for testifying truthfully at the trial, even though it must have been painful to relive your marriage publicly. Your honesty helped give us the justice Marcus deserved. The letter helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for Rebecca's choices, and that my failure to recognize her true nature didn't make me complicit in her crimes. Sometimes the people closest to us are the best at hiding their true selves. Rebecca's appeals were denied at every level. The evidence against her had been overwhelming, and her conviction was solid. She would likely spend the rest of her life in prison, which seemed appropriate for someone who had planned and executed a murder, then spent 5 years actively concealing her crime. 3 years after the trial, I married Jennifer Hayes in a small ceremony in Colorado. It was a second chance at happiness that I'd never expected to find. Jennifer understood my past and the challenges of rebuilding trust after such profound betrayal. We occasionally received updates about Rebecca through the victim notification system. She had been assigned to a general population unit at Perryville, where she worked in the prison library and maintained a clean disciplinary record. She had never admitted guilt or shown remorse for her crimes. The storage unit that had contained Marcus's belongings became a key piece of evidence in prosecutor training seminars. Detective Warren, who had remained in touch, told me that Rebecca's case was now used to teach other investigators about the importance of following financial trails and the significance of seemingly minor evidence like storage unit payments. If that anonymous tip hadn't come in about the storage unit, Detective Warren said, we might never have solved Marcus's disappearance. Your wife nearly committed the perfect crime. But there had been no perfect crime, only a series of calculated deceptions that had finally unraveled. Marcus Taylor's family had found closure, and Rebecca Stone Palmer had been held accountable for her actions. 5 years after the conviction, I visited Marcus's grave for the first time. His headstone was simple. Marcus Taylor, beloved son and brother, 1981 to 2019. His family had added a small inscription, "Truth endures forever." I placed a small bouquet of flowers on his grave and spoke the words I'd wanted to say since Detective Warren's first phone call. "I'm sorry I didn't know what was happening. I'm sorry I couldn't help. I hope you found peace." The case had taught me that we never truly know the people closest to us, and that love can coexist with deception in ways that are deeply disturbing. But it had also shown me the importance of truth, the power of persistent investigation, and the possibility of healing even after profound betrayal. Rebecca had destroyed multiple lives with her choices, Marcus's, her own, mine, and the lives of everyone who loved Marcus. But justice had prevailed, and those of us who survived had found ways to move forward. The quiet years of my marriage had been built on lies, but the life I'd built afterward was founded on truth. And that, I had learned, made all the difference. Detective Warren retired 2 years after Rebecca's conviction, but she kept in touch. "Your case was one of the most important of my career," she told me at her retirement party. Not because it was complex, but because it showed how patient investigation can bring justice, even when the perpetrator thinks they've gotten away with murder. Rebecca had almost succeeded. If not for the anonymous tip about the storage unit, if not for advances in cell phone tower analysis, if not for Detective Warren's persistence, Marcus Taylor might have remained a missing person forever. Rebecca might have continued living her double life, hiding the truth from me and from Marcus's family. But truth has a way of surfacing, even after years of careful concealment. In the end, Rebecca's need to maintain the storage unit, perhaps driven by guilt or love or simple inability to let go of the past, had become the evidence that destroyed her carefully constructed lies. I often wondered what would have happened if Marcus hadn't been killed that September night in 2019. Would Rebecca have gone through with their plan to disappear together? Would I have come home from work to find a note saying she was leaving me? Would I have spent the rest of my life wondering why my marriage had failed, never knowing about the affair or the depth of Rebecca's deception? In some ways, as terrible as the truth was, it was better than living with unanswered questions. Marcus's family felt the same way. Jennifer Taylor had told me that the uncertainty of not knowing what happened to her brother was almost worse than learning he'd been murdered. "At least now we know," she'd said. "We can grieve properly and move on with our lives." The storage unit had been cleaned out after the trial. Marcus's belongings returned to his family. But I sometimes wondered what Rebecca had been thinking during those monthly visits over 5 years. Had she been mourning Marcus, or simply maintaining evidence that might someday prove useful? Had she felt guilt about his death, or only regret that their plan to escape together had failed? I would never know, because Rebecca had never offered any explanation beyond her claims of innocence. Even in her prison interviews and appeals, she maintained that Marcus's death had been self-defense, and that her concealment of evidence had been motivated by fear and confusion. But the zip ties and bleach told a different story. They spoke of premeditation and planning, of a woman who had decided to murder her lover rather than risk exposure or abandonment. The defensive wounds on Marcus's hands suggested he had realized what was happening and tried to fight for his life. Rebecca had been convicted of second-degree murder rather than first-degree because the prosecution couldn't definitively prove premeditation. But the evidence strongly suggested that she had lured Marcus to the desert location with the intention of killing him and burying his body where it would never be found. The motive remained unclear. Perhaps Marcus had threatened to expose their affair. Perhaps he'd changed his mind about running away with her. Perhaps Rebecca had discovered that he was planning to take the money and disappear alone. The truth died with Marcus in the Arizona desert. What was clear was that Rebecca had been capable of extraordinary deception, maintaining a facade of normal married life while planning and executing a murder, then spending 5 years actively concealing her crime. The woman I'd shared a bed with, eaten breakfast with, made small talk with about work and weather and weekend plans, had been a killer. The realization had required extensive therapy to process. Dr. Hayes had helped me understand that Rebecca's ability to compartmentalize her life didn't reflect any failure on my part to see through her deception. Some people are simply skilled at presenting false versions of themselves to the world. Psychopaths and sociopaths can be extremely convincing, Dr. Hayes had explained. They study the people around them and become what those people want to see. You saw a quiet, devoted wife because that's what Rebecca wanted you to see. It wasn't real, but it was very carefully constructed. The most disturbing aspect was how normal everything had seemed. Rebecca hadn't been obviously troubled or unstable. She'd functioned normally at work, maintained friendships, participated in community activities. Her co-workers at Pickett and Associates had been shocked by her arrest, describing her as reliable and professional. But beneath the surface, she'd been living a completely different life. The phone records revealed the depth of her relationship with Marcus. They'd talked for hours every day, sent intimate text messages, made detailed plans for their future together. All while she was coming home to me every evening and pretending to be a contented housewife. The trial had revealed other disturbing details. Rebecca had researched methods of killing that would be difficult to detect. She'd studied disposal techniques that would delay discovery of a body. She'd planned multiple aspects of the crime with careful attention to forensic evidence. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of panic. It was a calculated murder committed by someone who thought she was smart enough to get away with it. Rebecca's case had become something of a cautionary tale in law enforcement circles. Detective Warren used it in training seminars to illustrate the importance of following financial trails and investigating seemingly minor inconsistencies. The monthly storage unit payments had seemed insignificant in 2019, but they'd ultimately solved a murder case. Follow the money, Detective Warren would tell new investigators. People can lie about almost anything, but financial records don't lie. Rebecca Stone Palmer thought she was being clever by maintaining that storage unit, but it became the thread that unraveled her entire story. The case had also highlighted the importance of modern investigative techniques. Without cell phone tower analysis and automated license plate reader data, the connection between Rebecca and Marcus's burial site might never have been established. Technology that hadn't existed even a decade earlier had made it possible to solve a crime that the perpetrator thought was undetectable. Marcus's family had established a scholarship fund in his memory, focusing on construction management students at local colleges. They'd use the restitution money from Rebecca's conviction to fund the scholarship, creating something positive from their tragedy. I contributed to the scholarship fund annually, feeling that it was important to honor Marcus's memory, even though I'd never known him in life. He'd been a victim of Rebecca's deception just as much as I had, though he'd paid a much higher price. The Marcus Taylor Memorial Scholarship became a way for all of us to move forward constructively. Rather than focusing on the horror of his death, we could focus on helping young people pursue the career that Marcus had been passionate about. It was a small step toward healing, but an important one. Jennifer Hayes and I had talked extensively about the psychological impact of discovering that someone you loved was capable of murder. It was a unique form of trauma that few people understood. Most victims of violent crime were harmed by strangers or acquaintances. Being victimized by someone you trusted completely created a different kind of damage. It's not just the specific betrayal, Jennifer had explained. It's the way it makes you question your ability to judge other people. If you could be so wrong about someone you lived with for 14 years, how can you trust your judgment about anyone? Rebuilding that trust had been the hardest part of recovery. It had taken years before I felt comfortable getting close to anyone again, even Jennifer herself. The fear of being deceived again was overwhelming, making every relationship feel potentially dangerous. But gradually, with therapy and time, I'd learned to separate Rebecca's deception from other people's honesty. Most people weren't skilled manipulators. Most people didn't have the emotional capacity to maintain elaborate lies for years. Rebecca had been an exception, not the rule. The trial had also revealed the extent to which Rebecca's deception had affected other people. Her co-workers had felt betrayed by her lies about working overtime when she was actually meeting Marcus. Her sister, who had provided an alibi for some of Rebecca's supposed weekend work sessions, felt guilty for unknowingly helping conceal the affair. Even Marcus's friends who had known about the relationship but hadn't realized the extent of Rebecca's deception felt manipulated. Rebecca had left a trail of damaged relationships and broken trust that extended far beyond her victims. People who had cared about her felt foolish for not recognizing her true nature. People who had trusted her felt violated by her lies. But there had also been unexpected connections formed through the tragedy. Marcus's family and I had developed a friendship based on our shared experience of being deceived by Rebecca. Other families of crime victims had reached out, offering support and understanding. The victim services community had provided resources and connections that helped all of us heal. Detective Warren had become more than just the investigator who solved the case. She'd become a friend who understood the unique challenges of discovering that someone you trusted was a murderer. Her persistence and professionalism had made justice possible, but her compassion had made healing possible. The case had changed all of us in different ways. Marcus's family had learned to find meaning in tragedy through their scholarship fund and victim advocacy work. Detective Warren had become a more effective investigator by understanding the importance of cold case review and technological advancement. I had learned to rebuild trust and find love again after profound betrayal. Even Rebecca's conviction had served a purpose beyond justice for Marcus. Her case had become a teaching tool for law enforcement, helping train investigators to recognize patterns of deception and follow seemingly minor evidence trails. It had also raised awareness about the psychological profiles of perpetrators who maintain elaborate facades while committing serious crimes. The storage unit that had contained Marcus's belongings was now rented by someone else, probably someone who had no idea of its history. But for those of us involved in the case, it would always be remembered as the key piece of evidence that brought a killer to justice. Rebecca's monthly payments to maintain that unit had been her downfall, but they also revealed something important about her psychology. For 5 years, she had been unable to completely let go of Marcus or the evidence of their relationship. Whether this was driven by love, guilt, or simple inability to face reality, it had ultimately ensured that justice would prevail. The anonymous tip that led to the storage unit's discovery had come from a former employee who remembered Rebecca's regular visits and thought they were suspicious. That person had made the choice to come forward even years after the fact, demonstrating that concerned citizens could still make a difference in solving cold cases. All of these factors had come together to solve a crime that might otherwise have remained unsolved forever. Rebecca's belief that she had committed the perfect murder had been undermined by technology, persistence, civic responsibility, and her own inability to completely erase the evidence of her crimes. The case served as a reminder that truth has a way of surfacing, even after years of careful concealment. Marcus Taylor's family had found the answers they needed. Rebecca Stone Palmer had been held accountable for her actions. And those of us who survived had found ways to rebuild our lives on a foundation of honesty rather than deception. The quiet years of my marriage to Rebecca had ended with her conviction and imprisonment. But the life I'd built afterward, founded on truth and genuine connection, had proven that healing was possible even after the most profound betrayal. Rebecca would likely spend the rest of her life in prison, which seemed appropriate for someone who had chosen murder over honesty, concealment over confession. But the rest of us had chosen differently. We had chosen truth, healing, and the difficult work of moving forward. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference.